Okay, the title of today's presentation is I Came, I Saw, I Wrote, Today's Autistic Creators. Today is November 18th, 2020, and it's 1 p.m. and this will be an hour-long talk via Zoom. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Timoney. I'm the librarian for assistive technology in the Center for Accessibility at the DC Public Library. I'm a white male with short hair and glasses. My pronouns are he, him, his. November is National Novel Writers Month. In honor of this, the Center for Accessibility invites Alec Frazier to talk on the topic, I Came, I Saw, I Wrote, Today's Autistic Creators. What do you think of the disabled and autistic characters currently in books, movies, and TV recently? Accurate portrayals? Good enough stories? For answers to these questions and more, Alec Frazier, an autistic 34-year-old resident of Takoma Park, Maryland, and disability rights advocate, will answer a set of questions about his points of view on autistic creativity and the status of disability inclusion in the arts today. Afterwards, he will be happy to answer questions from the audience. You can submit your questions through the chat box or through the Q&A box. If you are watching through Facebook Live, please submit questions as a comment. A disability rights advocate since he was 8 years old, Alec is the director of his own firm, Autistic Reality, and is the copyrighted author of 2 books, Without Fear, The First Autistic Superhero, and Veni Vidi Autism. He is a pop culture critic for Flickering Myth and Starburst magazine. For his work at Autistic Reality, Alec does editing work, public speaking, lobbying, peer advocacy, photography, and publicity, as well as many other forms of advocacy, and is very involved in these matters with the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial Legacy Committee. Alec has spoken on Capitol Hill, has mentored for the summer internship class of the American Association of People with Disabilities, has gotten major legislation passed, has appeared and spoken at multiple conferences and conventions, including New York Comic Con, and regularly meets with leaders in the federal government and private sector. Alec is also a proud inductee into the Susan M. Daniels Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame. Alec has a bachelor's in political science and a master's in disability studies, both from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Both his firm, Autistic Reality, and his entire work, Veni Vidi Autism, have pages on Facebook. He is on Blogger as Autistic Reality, where he has advocacy and personal blog under that name, as well as a pop culture blog entitled Veni Vidi Autism, a pop culture blog about autistic reality. He is the host of the Autistic Reality podcast, which you can find on SoundCloud and iTunes. You can also find audiovisual content from Alec on YouTube. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alec Frazier.
Hi, everyone. Great to see wonderful attendance today. I'm Alec Frazier. I am a tall, 6'5", kind of husky, 280-pound male with unfortunately disappearing brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black and gray striped shirt. My pronouns are he, him, his, although I am very friendly to the queer community. Thank you for having me today, Patrick. And just as a note for people who are looking into the book and the pop culture business, the book and pop culture websites are spelled Veni Vidi Autism. The book is VENI exclamation point space VIDI exclamation point space AUTISM exclamation point. The Facebook page, however, is VENI comma VIDI comma AUTISM. And I'm sorry, I forgot the spaces in there, but you know where they go. So thank you for having me. and it's good being here. We have a bunch of yeah. Thank you for messaging that. So I think you covered the introduction quite well. I'm glad to have question periods at the end. We have a script of questions to ask and answer. Let's go ahead with the first one.
I don't have the script for that.
Oh, that's what this. I gave you the script. That's what this presentation is.
Of the list of questions?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't have it, Alex. Sorry.
Okay, you were going to ask me those and I was going to answer them, but instead I will ask me those and I will answer them.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. My
Let
fault.
me let me okay. So please stop me 10 minutes before the end so that I can answer the final question and show my graphic.
We will.
So the first question is, how long have I been writing? Well, I've been, it's funny because the works that I do actually started, some of them started as scholarly works in the book Veni Vidi Autism, which I'm holding up right here. It has an image of me in a cloak in front of a red canopy with a gold eagle across the top. It's essentially me imitating the Emperor from Star Wars in the actual old Senate chamber of the US Capitol. In the book, I have a number of academic essays, which I made into the book. And so, how this really began was as academic writing. I was in my first class ever of my master's degree, and I had a thick term paper due. And so I discovered through research that Marvel Comics had invented the character of Tim Urich. That Tim was and this goes into the next question as well, and actually goes into the question after that. So, and Tim was autistic and became the hero Daredevil after the current Daredevil, who is blind, low vision, passes away. And I thought that that was incredible. And I read the stories. And actually, this, which I'm holding out right here, is a copy of the issue. It has a woman in a body bag with her head towards the bottom and her midsection towards the top. On the top of the issue, it says Daredevil End of Days. And this is the issue where that character uh, reveals himself to be the autistic Tim Urich. This is the reveal of, from what I know, the very first successfully rendered autistic superhero. And so I asked my advisor about doing a paper about it, and he's like mumble comic book, because that's how people are. They comics are still new media despite the fact that they've been around for 150 years. But so he so I I did the paper, and he gave his critiques, and then I said, is there any chance of publishing this? And he said, not bloody likely. And then I said, is there any chance of monetizing this? And this guy, the advisor, who was supposed to be rooting for me, laughed at me if there's a chance of monetizing this. But I knew a really great guy. Emil Novak Sr. was a professional mentor of mine. He still is in some respects, and he runs the oldest bookstore in Western New York, which is a comic book store called Queen City Books. And I asked him, "Can you help me get this published?" And so, holy crap, he did. Sorry about the language. And this is an image of the very first edition. We ran 2 editions of this. This is the book Without Fear, the first autistic superhero. And it is only about 10-15 pages. It has a character in a red suit holding his mask, but otherwise wearing the suit completely, standing on a rooftop. And and I and he was able to get me published, and so I went into the class that was being taught by the advisor a couple months later, and I threw down on the table $150 that I made in $5 bills selling that booklet, proving that yes, you can follow your dreams and you can monetize disability fund. So that is a bit of an explanation. Let's flesh it out. Second question is, as a reader and fan, and we're all really fans, did you find a gap available in fictional narratives and characters from the disability community at large and the autistic community specifically? Dude, when I was growing up, it was Rain Man and that's it. And Rain Man is not an encouraging depiction of an autistic individual since he's institutionalized at the end, and since and it's not he's not very realistic either. The idea of autistic savants has been largely disproven, um, and so that was it, and that's why having things like this comic are very important. I think that there's still gaps, like there's now that show, the Good Doctor, but unfortunately the Good Doctor stars a person who's not autistic. And I do know that there now that's not always an intentional slight on the part of production companies. Production companies are forbidden from asking certain questions when they hire someone. For example, when a character is when a character is supposed to be LGBTQ and they don't hire an LGBTQ person, if they know already that the person is LGBTQ, that's good, but they are not legally allowed to ask actors questions like that. And there are similar disclosure questions about being disabled. Um, so if they want to go with disabled actors, they have to either know that they have the diagnosis already, or hire someone who they think can play the part. We are working right now on getting people who have the diagnoses more involved in the acting world. There's a very good project called Lights, Camera, Access, run by Miss Terry Harmon Squire. Also, Danny Woodburn and SAG-AFTRA Screen Actors Guild are very involved with that. Ruderman Foundation has let loose several white papers on the matter. And Also, I came up with an idea at a Lights Camera Access symposium a few years ago of using the idea of inclusion riders to incentivize hiring of individuals with disabilities. Before that, an inclusion rider is when someone is hired and they have some, and the inclusion writers, when they have it in their contract, I will only work on this film if you hire this and that many disabled actors or set designers or writers or blah 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 blah. Now that's how the one that I came up with for disability inclusion writers. Um, Before that, inclusion writers had included the LGBTQ community and the African American community, Hispanic, etc., and using the inclusion writers as affirmative action for the disability community is a very, very good example, because we all know affirmative action is a good thing. What author or work inspired me to begin writing? I literally came up, showed this comic. It's the comic I showed before. And actually, I had some fan art made of the character. Here he is holding two batons in front of standing in front of an alley, wearing a red three-piece suit. And then I also have been inspired by a lot of creators in the comic industry. And here is a painting signed by my favorites. It's a painting of the character Daredevil, basically character all in red with horns looking back over his shoulder. And it has autographs of a number of people who inspire me, real autographs, like Charlie Cox, who played Daredevil in the show, um, and Joe Quesada, who is the current head of Marvel, and he's a dear friend of mine. Alex Milev, who's a really cool artist who drew my favorite work on the show and helped come up with the autistic character. And last but not least, the holy grail of autographs, Stan Lee, the creator of the Marvel Universe. And I got to meet Stan, and I got to give him a copy of the first book, which I'm holding up here, Without Fear, the First Autistic Superhero. And this is about which artists and writers inspired me. So I said to him, "Sir, you mean the world to me." And he said, "I'd better." and so and so he and so I gave him a copy of that book, and he said, "Great, I'll read it when I get home." And so the next day I got my photo taken with him, and you see him on these DVDs and things like that as this wonderful, fun-loving personality, and you're like, surely this has got to be something he plays for the screen. No, it's the real him, because the receipt machine broke during the photos, and he goes off to the bathroom, and he comes back, spreads his arms wide, and says, "Let the wonderment commence." And so it's the real him. And he passed away a couple of years ago, but the last thing he got from a fan before he passed away was a copy of my book, Being a Autism, which I'm holding up right here. And I am extremely honored that he was able to get that.
I've got the questions now, Alec, if you want me to ask questions.
Towards the end, let's do a couple more questions with, we were going to do questions at the end.
Yeah, but I've got the list of your questions so I can ask.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. What's the next one?
What attributes of your characters are most important to you, / what do you hope people take from your art?
Okay, this panel is sometimes given with people who create visual art or fiction storytelling. And I know this is National Novel Writers Month, and I know some awesome people who write novels. I'm looking at you, Wraith, you're awesome, and Josie Beckman, you're awesome, and Melissa Worth, and Betty Gaffeth, and KP Hallows, people like you. That said, my work is nonfiction, and I have actually encountered in the writing world, there's discrimination against people who write nonfiction, because the assumption is if you're writing nonfiction, then it's all scholarly, boring stuff, or that it's like all cited papers. Now, believe me, there are actually a few papers like that in the Veni Vidi Autism book, but I don't just do that. I do fun film reviews and question interviews with friends and writings on, using public transportation in Southern California for a fan meetup. And so my characters are real life people. And my and my aspirations, what do I hope people get from my work? I hope people learn about acceptance. I hope they learn about diversity. My book is just like any book anybody could come up writing. Yes, there's some disability subject matter, but I don't predicate my existence on disability alone. You see, I believe in 3 levels of identity. I'm 34. I almost say 35 every single time. It's like the age is coming up. Crow's feet. I'm getting older and older. But and it, what I say to people is that there are three levels of identity. First, we are all human. I'm spreading my arms wide here. We are all human. Um, we all live on this planet, and some of us off this planet, and enjoy the wonderful experience of being these people who we have more in common than sets us apart. And that should be remembered. In these tough dividing times, we should remember that we have more in common than sets us apart. Second level of identity, still very important, almost as important as the first one, but not quite. We are all us. We are all the unique individuals that we are. We all I'm Alec Frazier, and I have a huge book collection, and I like watching The Crown on Netflix, and I like photography, things like that. We are all us. Third level of identity is still hugely important. I'm putting emphasis on the word hugely. um uh, eh, but it is third level of identity, and that is any other identity out there. Believe me, I'm gay, I'm autistic, things like that. But I've seen identity rip people apart and turn people into warring tribes of individuals. And I think that if we think of the big picture, and that's what I hope people learn from my work.
Next question. What are your plans for your books and your heroes?
Well, my heroes are literally me at this moment, because I'm a nonfiction writer, and I should actually use this as sort of a plug to promote things. Don't worry, nothing corporate. I wouldn't do that to you. But the I am running YouTube interviews with various celebrities, everybody from the ruling prince of the Principality of Sealand to comic book artists like Aaron Cooter, and that's Kuder, and business people. I also have a podcast, the Autistic Reality Podcast. The YouTube channel is the Alec Frazier or Autistic Reality YouTube channel, and you can find a lot on that. Now, I'm also moving shortly, and will be taking a little bit of a break from business if I can keep myself from working. But I'm laughing as I say that. But uh, but that's what's next in line for me. The question is next in line for our heroes, and what's the question again?
What are your plans for your books and your heroes?
My books, I am, once this is all said and done, we have a huge virus. It's keeping us in the house. I am, my former employer, current colleague, and a dear friend of mine named JD Michaels, had a wonderful idea of writing a book of anecdotes and funny stories, and it would be named after something which still, after all these years, is on my mother's academic record. The book would be named To Incite Rebellion. She held a sit-in high school when she was a kid in Germany. Girls weren't allowed to wear pants, and so she held a sit-in using the school mimeograph machine. That was like an early copying device, and she used the mimeograph machine to make flyers, and she used the desks for sitting in, and she led a sit-in where girls sat in class wearing jeans. And so she has something on her academic record that followed her to college and even today that said, use school materials to incite rebellion. So To Incite Rebellion will be the title of this book of anecdotes whenever I come up with it. We've got a long time stuck at home, and I'm trying to prioritize what I do. I'm too busy for my own good.
Okay, what do you think of the disabled and autistic characters currently in books, movies, and TV recently? Accurate portrayals, good enough stories?
Well, I've mentioned The Good Doctor, and that it's he's not played by an autistic character. There have been people in the autistic community who have, like I saw that film, The Accountant, where Ben Affleck plays an autistic accountant, and a lot of people were like, "This is unrealistic. He's an assassin," and I'm like, "Well, it's a movie. And I thought the autistic part of the portrayal was very realistic. I thought the thing of him being an assassin is, action Hollywood stuff. Are we gonna expect Star Trek to really happen all of a sudden? Well, please, I hope it does. I hope it does. I'm holding my hands together, clasped and pleading. But so anyways, uh, but that's an issue. I know that there's a character in Star Trek Discovery played by Mary Wiseman, uh, uh, Ensign Sylvia Tilly, and she is most likely autistic, but it's not said. And actually, it should be mentioned that in this comic, the comic I showed earlier, the reveal of the first autistic superhero, same description as earlier. Um, in that comic, they don't actually mention the character's autism either. Instead, some people asked the author or writer named Brian Michael Bendis, and that's Bendis, and people asked him, "Is this character autistic? Because he really seems like it." And he's like, yeah, he is. And Bendis's explanation for why he didn't mention it in the comic is what makes the character so realistic. People, okay, this is DC, so the activism community is a bit different. But in the majority of the world, people don't run around throwing their arms out and saying, "I'm autistic." They if it comes up in conversation, then great. But unless it's an agenda item, which it often is in DC, it's not always mentioned at the forefront of every conversation. Um, and the and actually, I did an interview, which is in the Veni Vidi Autism book, which I'm holding up right now. And I interviewed the number 2 guy in Hollywood, John Landau, who's co-produced Avatar and Titanic and things like that. And I asked him, and his name is spelled Alandau. And I asked him, do you agree with putting disabled characters in featured roles in your stories? And he didn't fall for the trick, because that is a trick question. And what he immediately called it out. He said, "You see, I worried about featuring," and I'm putting that in air quotes right here. "I worry about featuring because that means that you're making a special interest story out of it, and we don't want to show people with pity." My friend Joe Shapiro, reporter for NPR, came up with the go-to book on the law passage, ADA, American Disabilities Act, and that book is called No Pity. We don't want pity for the disabled population. We don't want them to be a special interest pity piece. We want that characters with disabilities, like Tim Urich, whose fan art I'm holding up here, same description as before. We want characters like him to be shown living their everyday lives and living them productively, happily, healthfully, and be positive role models. But we don't want to turn them into pity agenda items, you know? And that is the big lesson that he taught or reaffirmed for me. He being John Landau.
Do you see an opportunity in the open creative online brands like Netflix and Amazon?
Yes, Netflix, Amazon, and even YouTube have room for creators to do a lot more with their work. and own brands. There are actually several creative brands like Amazon Prime's television shows and Amazon, yeah, sorry, I said that, and Netflix, and which now have basically television show production. Okay, I should rephrase that. Amazon, Netflix, etc., have production bureaus which actually let creators and unaffiliated people pitch their ideas to the networks, and then they turn them into shows. And they have actually had a number of really important pieces come up like that. In fact, kind of like that, not entirely independently, but the film Crip Camp, which stars my good friend Judy Human, the humanitarian disability activist Judy Human, was one of these ideas that was pitched. It was come up with by the disability community, and it was pitched to these networks using those processes. And I also want to say that Barack and Michelle Obama have started one of these production companies, which they use to tell humanitarian stories. And I think that Crip Camp may have even been affiliated with that. Um, and I've gone into the major networks, but I've also interviewed for my podcast a guy named Phil Lamar. You might recognize him as every voice of every animated character under the sun for the last 20 years, but he's also been a comedian. I loved him on Mad TV back in the day. Phil Lamar says, Amazon is good, Netflix is good, but if you truly want to put creativity in the hands of the creators, go to YouTube. I'm throwing my arms wide again. This is YouTube is truly creator governed, and it is the most, and I'm not using democratic in political form, but I'm using in a social form. It's the most democratic of video platforms, production platforms out there. And so YouTube can be the great equalizer with disability representation in entertainment, so long as you follow the terms and conditions.
Mm. If you had the attention of the major entertainment and comic publishers and brands, what would you want them most to know about your work and our community?
We're really not that different from everybody else. We expect dignity. We don't like pity, but we are amongst you. And then in terms of entertainers, there's still a huge lack of hiring to individuals with disabilities. And in terms of person first language, I use them interchangeably: person with disability, disabled person. I apologize if I'm offending anyone here. And so I've talked about how to hire individuals with disabilities, but that has not. But some creators say, we don't see that many disabled creators out there to hire. And I'm like, then you're not looking hard enough. We're everywhere. We're actors and puppet makers and writers and illustrators, and it's not a new thing either. Autism is a diagnosis that's come up in the last 75 years. Doesn't mean it's new. Leonardo da Vinci, Vincent van Gogh, Salvador Dali, Frank Lloyd Wright, Mark Twain, Thomas frickin' Jefferson, all autistic individuals. And and just because the diagnosis is new doesn't mean that it is new. And I'm sorry that, as a disclaimer, because I get miffed about this, there's nothing different in our water. And the vaccines don't cause autism. Now that I've said that, thank you. But it's so it's we are out there, and we are looking for for jobs in the entertainment community. You know, I do so much creative wise, you know, the YouTube, the SoundCloud podcast, the written work for Starburst and Flickering Myth and for both of my blogs, doesn't pay that much. Um, and and when you are a disabled creator, you have different kinds of talents. So, for example, someone who may not be able to write very well may actually be, well, first of all, someone who may not be able to write very well may need accommodations. And I use this headset to write. I use Dragon Naturally Speaking, which Patrick can tell you all about. And I use that to write. Um, uh, but also some of us might be better at video, or you know, some of us can't understand spoken word very well, but can understand signs or things like that. um, I would say that there's almost nobody with a disability who cannot do an equal honest day's work without proper accommodations. Don't pity the disabled population, accommodate and hire the disabled population. That's what I'd tell people.
Gotcha. Now, I have one more question, but we also have some questions from the audience. So,
Okay, certainly.
so I'll save my last question for a couple minutes here, and we'll go to the questions from the audience.
Sure.
Number one from Terry Hartman Squire is, how did you get interested in writing?
Well, I mentioned that earlier. Terry is a dear colleague. Hi, Terry. Terry is a dear colleague, and she's kind of like a work aunt to me these days. AUNT. Hi, Terry. Love you. You're awesome. How did I get interested in writing? I mentioned earlier the academic papers that I did, and that and because of Terry's efforts and JD Michael's efforts, I've actually been able to make that come full circle. I wish I had the thing to show you, but I packed it up already. One of my papers in school was a historiography of the go-to resource on the architectural and social history of the White House. It's a book, a 2-volume book set called The President's House. And it's by a guy named Dr. William Seal, who died about a year ago. But before he died, he came to speak. He came to sign and meet people at the White House Historic Society or White House Historic Association, and I met him and I gave him a copy of that work that I had signed for him, and he signed a copy of his masterwork for me. And he said his nephew was autistic, and that I told him that Jefferson's autism probably almost caused war with the United Kingdom. It's a very interesting part of history. And then we had a wonderful time. We met, took photos together, and then I thought that was that. And then I was like, hot diggity, I've met my favorite scholar ever. But it got even better. About a week later, I received in the mail a handwritten note from him. He said, "Your work is fascinating and worthy," he said, and he asked me to talk to him anytime and call him Bill. And that is how your writing comes full circle. Terry, you asked what inspired my writing, and literally academic writing helped me start as a professional writer. And because of Terry's efforts and because of JD's efforts and works like that, I was able to meet my favorite mind and my favorite academic, and form a lovely dialogue with him.
I've got another question here from an anonymous attendee. A new Marvel character is going to be in the new movie coming out, She is Deaf. Do you think that this will create a better understanding of disabled people?
Normally, I would say, I don't know, but I'm actually, uh, thank you, Terry. That's awesome. I, uh, I, I am actually friends with some of the top people at Marvel. Joe Quesada is the head of everything creative for Marvel. Um, his last name is spelled no, sorry, is spelled Quesada. And I've actually interviewed him both on YouTube and on my podcast. And he is very much committed. I've done disability consulting for Marvel. I know that they've hired individuals in the disability community, and they take great pains to being accurate. I know that when Daredevil became the first mainstream disabled superhero in the 60s, I'm putting emphasis on the word 60s. I know that uh, a great deal of his early readership was blind and low vision populations uh, who finally felt represented. Stan Lee, who came up with the character, was very worried that they would be offended, uh, but they actually regarded this character as bringing them to the creative table. And Marvel has done that with a number of other kinds of characters, transgender characters who are deaf or hard of hearing. In fact, Hawkeye, who we know from the Archer, who we know from the Marvel movies, is low hearing in the comics. In the comics these days, he usually wears hearing aids, and they are going to be making him hard of hearing or deaf in the uh, Marvel TV series that is coming out, focusing on his character. And I know that Jeremy Renner, the actor, is not deaf, but I do not doubt for the last flaming second that they will hire disabled consultants for that show. I know that Marvel has been at the forefront of diversity. Stan Lee, at the height of the civil rights unrest in like 1967 or something like that, Stan Lee was always a gee golly gosh kind of person. You didn't expect really serious things to come from his mouth, but he said he came out in 1969 or 67 or something with an essay that said, "Listen, we think that comics are all about fun and games, but we have a unique opportunity to represent this country, and this country is filled with diversity. And if you do not respect you," and he amended this and worked with this till the day he died. By the time he died, he said, if you don't respect a transgender individual, a disabled individual, a gender nonconforming individual, a black individual, a Hispanic individual, if uh, a refugee, a migrant, if you don't respect these people, you're not just un-American, but you're unworthy of these heroes that we create for you. And he was very strong about that. He meant that very strongly.
I have another question from an anonymous attendee. I am in the process of writing a children's book on diversity and disability. Do you have any recommendations on how I can go about possibly marketing it and getting it published?
JD has helped me with this tremendously. You may actually want to contact him. I will see if I can share that with you, info with you. But I'll tell you the process we use. Amazon is I know it's the big corporate entity, and some people don't like it for various reasons, but they have done a lot towards getting independent authors published. And I'm one of the authors. They've done my book, Vinny VD Autism, was published through Amazon. Using the Amazon publication system, pretty much anybody with any kind of writing can get published. I would recommend that you don't just release the book, but that you go to conventions of writers. And in the comic book world, that's Comic-Con. There are also writers' conventions, and that you also publicize the heck out of your work. I'm sure Patrick has a lot of resources in the local community. I know that we are in Washington, D.C., and I'm giving a big smile right now because we are in the same city as the Library of Congress, the world's biggest library and literary cultural institution. And they doubtlessly have many people there who you can contact, who can put you in touch with writers associations and conferences. I do have to admit, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, these conferences aren't doing very well physically. The pandemic won't last forever. Um, but yeah, use I recommend using Amazon to actually publish your work, and then using all available social media means and blog entries and whatever to promote your work and get it out there.
Another question from an anonymous attendee. What comic books should I start my 10-year-old son reading?
Okay, there are definitely comics you shouldn't let them read. Psst, Preacher, don't let them read Preacher. But I say not Batman, because that can be kind of tough, but Superman is good. Wonder Woman is great, and it's female empowerment. I also say Spider-Man is very friendly to 10-year-olds. I know that comic book companies actually create certain lines of comics and certain books and graphic novels that are meant towards different age groups, and you might want to look into that. There are comics with very adult content out there, and there are comics with more teenager oriented content. But let's see what else. X-Men is good. X-Men promotes diversity. Actually, X-Men has always been about the civil rights movement, and that's why the first publicly out gay superhero was an X-Men character. North Star was his character name. And so comics, listen, I'm in favor of diversity. I'm in favor of teaching our kids about diversity. Comics are an awesome way of doing that. And if you say, but I don't want my books to be political, comics have always been political. Dude, that's how they started. William Randolph Hearst, the publisher, promoting political causes in the Spanish American War in the 1890s with comics, but I like Marvel especially, but also some of DC, because they promote diversity. I mean, I told you what Stan Lee said about that. So yeah, Stan Lee is, by the way, the name Stan and then the last name Lee, Lee. Yeah. So that those are some titles. Um, Also, there are some more titles that are meant towards kids. Sonic the Hedgehog has some great series that 10-year-olds would like, and Ninja Turtles possibly. Those Sonic and Ninja Turtles are towards the younger end of the spectrum. The more mainstream you go, the more towards teen you get. And then there are imprints of comics that are meant specifically for adults, like Marvel's Max line and DC Black Label, and basically the entirety of the Vertigo and Wildstorm lines.
Alec, we've got one more question for you from your script. Would you
Yes.
like me to read that one? What would your action figure look like?
Well, there's a question you asked people. We've got a little bit of time left. Patrick, who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, I don't know. Brad Pitt.
Good choice. Don't we all? Now, I before he died, I thought James Gandolfini would be able to play me like 30 years in the future. You know, if you were taller, of course. Um, Jude Law is not always the super hunk that we were used to seeing him as. He's actually been known to put on quite a bit of weight for parts, and he's been known to lose hair for parts. Like he played Karenin in the film Anna Karenina, and and you know there are I listen. I'm no supermodel. Actors, but please, not Danny DeVito. Although it was his birthday a few days ago. But if you're asking what I would want my action figure to look like, thanks to my friend JD, I actually have an action figure. This is me. He had me 3D scanned, and it even has my glasses. See, I'm wearing it's a figure of me, a tall individual wearing a gray suit with a blue dress shirt underneath and black glasses like the ones I have on my face right now. And I have one hand, my right hand up to my chin, and my left hand is by my side, and it even has my dress shoes. He had me 3D scanned uh, in order to be this figure, and I'm gonna put zoom on it. Here's the face, see, and then everything, every part, the shoes and the back. He had me scanned in great detail in 3D by someone who's done great work for these Marvel movies, and who I think had to run afterwards because he had an appointment to scan Bill Murray's left foot, if I'm correct. It's Hollywood is a fun job. But that is two questions on Facebook. Okay, great. So that is what my action figure would look like. I think no, it's not out of print on Amazon. They print it on demand. Here, I will add it to chat. One sec. One sec, I'll add it to chat. Um, you may be looking at the first edition. It should be down, but yeah, they print these books on demand and ship them to you. It's a long link, but I am getting onto the chat right now and sending the link right now. Here's the link to DCPL programs, and DCPL programs can share that. Okay, thank you. Um, and Great, wonderful. So yeah, you can get copy of it there. Um, so where there were two other questions, yes.
Uh,
Sorry, this is Julia. The other question was also by the same person, Gwen Lewis. And they asked, you started advocacy at age 8. How did you begin?
I was in third grade in Boulder, Colorado, and we had a project every I could take days to answer this, but I'll do the best I have in the 5 minutes allotted. um there was a project we did at the end of the year to go to the Mesa Verde National Park and work on nature conservation and historic site preservation. And we did so with funds from a grant from the Lieutenant Governor's office. She ran uh, the cultural affairs. I think her name was Gail Norton at the time. And I gave a speech in front of her and other state officials asking for money for or thanking them for money. Or a lot of politics is about money, and advocacy is about money. Money makes the world go round. And so that is, I was chosen to speak before the lieutenant governor and other people. My first meet, that was something I kind of did without knowing the significance of it at the time. In 8th grade, we were trying to raise money for the special education department, special education of the schools. And there was a measure in the Colorado General Assembly, as the legislature was called, that was supposed to lift caps, taxpayer funding and spending caps on special education. And I spoke twice before the state legislature to do that, once before the House Education Committee, and one of them before the Senate Education Committee. And then various people in the legislature did not like the idea of raising education funding for people with disabilities, but we tricked them by saying, fine, you don't like raising funding for special ed, how's about we raise the funding for all education? And the measure passed, and now are no spending caps on any educational matters in the state of Colorado. I should also say that I have been owning the bullies my whole life. There's a fair amount of bullying growing up, and it wasn't always on the part of students. It was also on the part of adults who should know better. And one of those instances happened during the House Education Committee meeting. One of the more conservative delegates, representatives, said that I belonged out of the public eye, that I should be basically quarantined at home for the rest of my life. And the chair of the committee told him if he ever said anything like that again, he'd be expelled from the chambers. And I said, thank you, Madam Chairman, and big fat smile on my face. So yeah, that was a pretty interesting moment, you know.
I have a concluding script to read here.
Sure.
Thank you for all for attending today's I Came, I Saw, I Wrote, today's Autistic Creators Session. And thank you to Alec for taking the time to help us celebrate National Novel Writers Month. For those attending today that want further information or have questions, you can contact Alec at autisticreality@nothingaboutUswithoutus.net or Alec Frazier at comcast.net, or by phone at 1-607-342-8543. You can follow Alec on Twitter at Autistic Reality. His website is www.nothingaboutuswithoutus.net. He is also on LinkedIn and Instagram. Alec is on Flickr as Autistic Reality. You can find pages for Autistic Reality and Vani Vidi Autism on Facebook. If you'd like to learn more about the Center for Accessibility in our programs, you can contact us at 202-727-2142 or email dcplaccess@dc.gov. Thank you again, Alec, for joining us, and happy National Novel Writers Month.
Thank you. One correction. My email address is actually autisticreality@nothingaboutuswithoutus.net.
Okay.
Thank you. The one you gave was my personal email address. For business, autisticreality@nothingaboutuswithoutus.net. Thank you, Patrick. You're a dear old friend, and thank you so much for having this. And thanks to the Center for Accessibility for having me. It was an honor being here.
We appreciate you.
Okay, thanks.